Hello and welcome into the second live edition of the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber of the Center Daily Times. She is Audrey Snyder of The Athletic. And Audrey, we now get some freedom on Saturday. Isn't it nice?
Do we, John? Do we? I mean, I feel like it's
More than
like
we thought.
Penn State now, they have their offensive coordinator, Kansas's Andy Kotelnicki. So it's out of the way, but like it'll become official on Friday, John. So the Board of Trustees, of course, have to approve all major contracts like this. So technically we're off the breaking news watch, I think. But I mean, John, you might have just jinxed it, because who's to say what's to come potentially with Manny Diaz? Transfer
right.
portal opens on Monday, bowl selection on Sunday. It's just we're just rolling right now.
Well, and I have Penn State men's basketball. They play Bucknell at noon on Saturday, which will be an endeavor in its own right.
Yeah, I will not be watching that.
Yeah, no, you won't. But this is something I think that has been in the works for a little bit, right? Like, I don't think either of us were surprised when this came down that Kotelnicki was the hire. It is it's interesting, right? I think there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
He was not one of the names that I had listed in my initial list of candidates.
Same.
I think we had both, or at least I had heard some of the Joe Moorhead buzz early on, then that faded, and then you started to hear nothing, at least on my end, for a little bit while we were specifically out in Detroit, which there's numerous reasons why I was hearing nothing while we were out there.
I think, though, right, like a lot of that is by design. James Franklin,
Yes.
He even said it, right? He wanted to keep this close to the vest. He always does. We also heard several times about I want to tell our players first before other people. I'm not sure at this point, as we record this Thursday night, if that happened or not. I don't know if
it did not. I can say with certainty that the players did not find out.
So the players learned from us.
Well, they learned from social media, presumably, unless they weren't on social media and then they found out. But yeah, this did not go down how I think James wanted it to. The Yurcich hire, or the Yurcich firing, I should say, at least, kind of did, right? Like, they at least told the players, even if the players' parents didn't find out right away. But yeah, it came together quick. Today, at least, this was a name I think we had all started hearing in recent days, and we all saw the flight tracker stuff that some people mistakenly connected to.
I was not tracking flights. I did not go down that rabbit hole, thankfully.
Well, I'm on Twitter too much, which is a given. And that some people were connecting the women's volleyball team's flight with the coaching search, but there was a meeting with James Franklin down in Kansas earlier this week. Prior to that flight, you would have to do some other flight tracking to find that one. But yeah, this was building, I think, toward this. I think a lot of people had pre-written some things. We all were kind of ready to go.
My understanding, John, and again, I could be wrong, but my kind of reading tea leaves here was that Joe Moorhead was in play if other things would have fallen through, right? We know that Kotelnicki was somebody who was garnering a lot of interest, which I think also speaks highly to, one, that Penn State was able to get a competitive contract in place for a guy who was highly sought after, and two, which to me, this part makes sense, but keep in mind, like, there's enough interest, there's enough talent on this roster that an elite offensive coordinator, because I think that I'm putting him in the elite category, John. Do you agree with me?
I agree, and we can get into why, but I completely agree. I think this is an excellent hire.
But this is an elite offensive coordinator who wants to come here, and Penn State has the money to pay, because I think, and we're already seeing so much of this, and it drives me crazy. We're seeing it a lot with Manny Diaz and people saying, well, just pay him more money, right? If he's in contention for the Duke job, which he is, if he's in contention at Duke, just pay him more money to stay here as a DC. And it's like, sometimes it doesn't come down to the money, right? There are only so many head coaching jobs in the country, and if he really wants to be a head coach, which he's been upfront about since he got here, like, it will not matter what you pay him. So I want to make sure those things are separate, because we hear so much about the assistant coach salary pool, and I think a lot of fans have kind of been clinging to that of Penn State won't pay. That has not been true, especially the last few years. Now, early on in James Franklin's tenure, yes, that is accurate, but that was something that James was really adamant about even during the later years of Sandy Barber's tenure. So I wanted to get that out there, kind of get that off my chest a little bit.
And before we get too far into this, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. If you're watching us live on YouTube, hit the subscribe button down below. Hit the thumbs up on the video. That always helps out. And of course, if you're listening after the fact on Apple Podcasts, leave us a 5-star rating and review there. We always appreciate it. But no, this is this is the kind of hire that you make when you have that at your disposal, right? Like this is the kind of hire you make when you can kind of pay what you need to pay to get the guy you want to get, because he made $1.1 million this past year because he had a $100,000 retention bonus on top of his $1 million he was already set to make. So he was not like this was not bargain shopping by any means. But let's get into the hire itself, right? Because I think this is fascinating. I think, frankly, this is as well as James Franklin could have done. I know some people wanted some sitting head coaches other places. Some people wanted Joe Moorhead, which I think also would have been a good hire for what it's worth. People wanted Joe Brady. People wanted them to look at Ken Dorsey.
Which those two to me were unrealistic, but
I thought Dorsey may have been unrealistic. I thought Dorsey would have been a good hire for what it's worth. But
Brady, I was like, absolutely. That's
timing never lined up. Yeah. Timing never lined up. With Sean Lewis, he ends up getting the head coaching job at San Diego State. I did think that could have been a good hire had they gone down that route. Obviously, they didn't. But this, to me, was the best hire you can make. And it comes down to creativity for me, right? If I'm a head coach looking to hire somebody, I want someone that can find a solution regardless of what the talent allocation looks like, right? Like if you have a really good quarterback and subpar receivers and good running backs, I want a guy who can figure out what to do with that. If you have a bad quarterback, bad running back, and really good receivers, I want a guy who can figure out what he can do with that. And I think Kotelnicki is the kind of guy who can do that, right? He's going to find solutions. If you're on Twitter, you've already seen a lot of the videos. My favorite continues to be the guard being in the slot, coming in motion, and then just leveling a poor edge rusher. Yeah, that did not see it coming and was kind of set up to fail on that one. But no, I think this is it's a creative hire by James to go to someone like Kotelnicki. But I also think Kotelnicki himself is very creative, and Penn State's going to benefit from that from the jump.
Yeah, there are a few things that kind of stand out to me. I went back and was, again, because, when names start getting floated this time of year, I started listening to a bunch of podcasts that he's been on over the years, right? So there were some during his time at Wisconsin, River Falls. There was one during his time this past October at Kansas, which was really interesting. And I've pulled kind of some themes out of that too that we can discuss. But I went back to what James Franklin told us last Tuesday, before we took off for Detroit. And he was asked kind of what are his parameters for an offensive coordinator hire? What is he looking for? And the thing that he hit on, he said it's about how you open games. It's about third downs, and it's about explosive plays. And also you want someone with a large enough sample size that you know what you're getting, right? He had made the point where maybe you have an all-world quarterback or an all-world wide receiver, an all-world running back, and it skews those numbers. You're getting an offensive coordinator here in someone who has been an OC for 18 years, right? I think that is certainly important. I pulled it up. Kansas this past year on third downs. They were 13th in FBS. Penn State was 59th. Explosive plays. And I'm, again, we can dive into this deeper with explosive plays a little bit later, but just right now for scrimmage plays of 20 plus yards, which of course Penn State goes by 16 for passes and rushes of 12. We'll get into that later. But for the purpose of this, Kansas plays of 20 plus yards. They were 23rd in FBS. Penn State 117th. Total offense, Kansas was 29th. Penn State 62nd. I mean, John, no matter really how you slice it, this is a massive upgrade. And I think the piece you hit on with the creativity, like I was sending messages back and forth with some of my colleagues at The Athletic, and I said, hey, this looks really fun. I forgot that, Penn State's allowed to play a fun style of offense.
Right. Like I saw the clips on Twitter.
It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the clips on Twitter. I was like, oh, this seems fun to watch. It's like, yeah, they should do more of this. But no, I think you nailed it. And I think some people will look at Kansas' production the last 2 years and say, well, they had Jalen Daniels, who I think at times has been in the Heisman conversation.
He's been hurt, though, too. I mean, that's the other
Jalen Daniels played 3 games this season.
Yeah.
And they were still in SP Plus. Last I checked, they were number 24 in SP Plus as of this past week. They finished 2022 number 9 in SP Plus, which is, of course, a metric that is essentially that's a forward-facing metric that's trying to articulate college football efficiency, right? And how efficient an offense is in one number. And to finish 9th at Kansas after a full season last year is remarkable, right? Like I think it's a sign of the not just creativity, but how good he is as a play caller, as a play designer, and that also was with Jalen Daniels only playing 9 games.
He can do more with less, right? Like that's to me is the takeaway. Is like you look at Kansas. Yes, Lance Leipold has done a hell of a job at Kansas. So I think there might be some of that. People say Kansas and they kind of roll their eyes at it, not looking, not going into the in depth on what's transpired there. But yeah, to me, that's the exciting part of this hire is you look at what you can do there and you say, okay, we know Nick Singleton's committed to being here next year. We know Drew Aller's committed to being here. And you say, yeah, this is a guy who can creatively use it. And John, I don't know if you caught this because you mentioned some of the Twitter clips that are floating around out there. He has used 2 quarterbacks on the field at the same time. Fabiola package 2.0, here they come.
Listen, I wouldn't be leaning on it, but that's just me. But listen, if you can do it effectively, and a lot of the stuff they ran, like they kept running essentially QB sweeps, right, where they would hand it off to the quarterback and they would run a rollout, and that would essentially just get the quarterback more momentum rolling out, and that would allow them to make plays in those situations with the second quarterback taking the snap and handing it off to whoever you want throwing the pass there. But you mentioned those guys coming back. This is also about maximizing what they have at wide receiver. Right. There are guys at receiver that we know are talented. We don't know who's coming back really at any position on any team in college football as we continue to learn, just watching guys enter the portal left and right from other programs. That's only going to
announce that they intend to enter the portal because the actual opening day for underclassmen comes Monday, the 4th.
Yes.
But grad transfers can open now. But yeah, everybody, as you said, John, everybody is kind of making it known what they plan to do, at least elsewhere. No one at Penn State has said anything yet.
Right. And I anticipate, right. I'm sure it's also happening while we're recording, knowing our luck. But I anticipate that will start next week at Penn State and start en masse elsewhere too, right? Like we're seeing big names generally are entering right now. You will see a lot more guys enter next week. You'll see a lot more, guys getting offers. We saw a wide receiver, Jamari Macklin, today receive an offer from Penn State. He tweeted that out. And so like, you don't know who's going to be in this receiver room next year. But I think given, and I will be watching way too much Kansas football, all 22 over the next week, and I'll have a story on this next week.
Better than watching Iowa, John. It's better for your health.
Listen, speak for yourself. Saturday is going to be very funny, and I cannot wait. But I will have a breakdown of what I'm seeing from Kotelnicki's offense at Kansas and what I expect it to look like. But on first glance, from watching Kansas a little bit this year, from the clips you're seeing on Twitter and everything, it feels like he's going to maximize these receivers and put them in a position to succeed. I know it's not necessarily, I don't think they're necessarily going to have like these massive, like guy has 1,700 receiving yards or anything like that. But I think they're going to be successful. And frankly, that matters more than anything for a program that the position was completely unsuccessful this year.
This is something I was teasing what I've been consuming on these podcasts, because otherwise I was just going down this podcast rabbit hole and was going to listen to all of these Andy Kotelnicki guest appearances and have nothing to show for it. So I come with some homework today, John, and it's kind of to show off what I found. But you mentioned the limitations piece, right? Obviously the receiving core, that's the spot that Penn State needs to hit hardest in the portal. That is stating the obvious. One of the things that Andy Kotelnicki said on the Jayhawker podcast, if anyone gets the chance to listen to it, it came out this October from Kansas, their official site. Really interesting kind of insight, getting to know his background a little bit. But one of the things that Andy said is about his philosophy and how it's about understanding players' limitations versus their capabilities, and that it's about tailoring plays to the personnel that you have. So again, and now here's the thing, every coach says that, but you actually have to go out and do it. And what we're able to see from his body of work is that he was able to do it. I also think, John, his coaching background is really interesting. Penn State now has 2 coaches on staff who have spent time at Western Illinois. You know the other one, John?
Wow.
Yeah, of course, right?
Yeah, he's a there. Listen,
so this is,
come on now.
I wanted to make sure you're still here. Class is still in session here. So that's kind of his coaching career started 2004, 2005. He's at Western Illinois, right? Then from there, he goes to Wisconsin River Falls. He was the OC there from 2006 to 2010.
That was after playing there, for what it's worth. I believe he was a center there.
And then after that, he actually said on the Jayhawker podcast that he connected with Lance Leipold on a bus, that they were at like the coaching convention in Nashville, and like they had known each other from from coaching in the same conference in Wisconsin, but like they met on a bus, kind of hit it off. So then he goes to Division II, University of Mary in North Dakota. Are you familiar with them at all, John? Because I am not.
So when I was doing some research on Kotelnicki the other day, this is when I discovered that there was a university named just Mary,
Yes.
which is interesting.
Yeah, we're all going to be getting familiar with them. We're all going to be upping their website, their page views I'm sure here in the coming weeks. But then after that, from 2013 2014, he was at Wisconsin Whitewater, and that's where he and Lance Leipold really worked together, right? And then from there, he follows them, of course, to Buffalo, and then from there they go together to Kansas. So to me, it's, we've kind of seen the maturation, the evolution of the James Franklin coaching tree in the decade plus now that he's been here. This is going to be interesting for Andy in that the guy that you've been working with for the last 11 years, you've got a different boss now. You've got a different head coach. There's ways that programs are run that are going to be drastically different. So for me, I'm curious to see just kind of from the human element how that works, because you get accustomed to doing so many things one way with one head coach. How does that kind of align with James? And I'm sure that's what the interview process is all about, right?
Well, I was going to say, I don't know Andy Kotelnicki. I've never met him, never talked to him.
Same.
I would be surprised if it doesn't work out from a personality standpoint, strictly based on how things went with the last offensive coordinator, right? I would think that would be a priority, that cohesiveness that we talk about, that working together, the kind of buy-in. It would be really surprising if, given how things went, that all of a sudden, they went right back to the well of, well, maybe it'll work here. I think it will likely be a culture fit. I think I would have to guess that James prioritizes that. I mean, he generally does when he makes these hires anyways. We've seen that in the past, that a lot of these guys fit the culture and fit exactly what he wants in a coach.
Yurcich one was kind of the one that seemed, just personality-wise, just seemed off.
Well, and it came out of nowhere too, right? If you remember, I think it was January 9th of 2021, when it was just like a press release saying that Kirk Ciarrocca had been relieved of his duties and that Mike Yurcich had been hired in one fell swoop. So I think
that's right. It was the old 2-for-1. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Some of us were trying to write a story to break the news, and they just went ahead and tweeted it. It was a very upsetting day for me. But no, I think like this is probably going to work out from that standpoint. You mentioned Singleton and Katron Allen. Kotelnicki gets a lot out of his running backs, right? Like he puts those guys in position to succeed. He maximizes what they do. He's not going to ask. He's going to allow Nick Singleton to operate on the outside, is my guess, right? You're not going to see him trying to hammer in between the tackles constantly. You're going to see more outside zone. You're going to see more stuff that operates to the open side of the field with Singleton. Again, I'll dive into much more of this after
we see wide receivers throwing passes again, John. I know how much you love that.
Maybe, but maybe it'll come with some creativity, and maybe it won't be like three times in one game when you're kind of telling on yourself. But no, I think this is. I don't want to predict the future. This feels like a hire that's going to work out, and it feels like a hire that a lot of people have praised. It's funny, the same day that Indiana hires Curt Cignetti, right, and it's been like universally praised. You see Kotelnicki get hired by Penn State, and it's kind of universally praised. And not to be like the bearer of bad news, but it feels like one of those is probably not going to work out. Just the nature of these things, right? Like it feels like once the consensus feels one direction, it doesn't always go that way. A lot of people also like the Mike Yurcich hire.
I was going to say, I remember included. That. Like that was Yeah, I think that's kind of the cautionary tale here. Yeah,
there was other stuff there that didn't allow that to work out. But no, I do think this will work out. I think it is a very good hire. I am personally excited to watch an offense that is just, as a fan of football, right? As someone who just enjoys creativity offensively, I feel like I'm definitely going to be watching some Penn State games next year, 3, 4, 5 times, replaying plays over and over again, watching them, because this is creativity that I don't think we've seen at Penn State in a long time. Frankly, not creativity you see many places. And I think if you're a fan, you have reason to believe that the wide receivers may not be explosive number guys, but they're going to be maximized and they're going to be utilized in a way that allows them to help the offense. I think you see the running backs are maximized. I think you see the quarterback and Drew Aller is going to be maximized as well.
Yeah, I had somebody who asked me earlier on Twitter, like, what do I think Drew Aller thinks of the hire? And kind of my response was, well, I'm sure he's on board with it because he said he's going to be here regardless, right? I do think you look at Jalen Daniels' numbers, right, when healthy, which has been the big if there. Um, that has to be exciting, right? I think again, just from what I've been able to glean, talking with folks, if you haven't already, go check out my colleague Max Olson. Did a great story. He went to Lawrence, Kansas last season and sat down with Andy Kotelnicki kind of to explain to readers what this offense is like and how it's working and why it worked at Kansas. Absolutely go check out that story. It was really insightful and kind of helpful as we tried to piece things together here. But some of the quotes from Jalen Daniels in that story just really speak to the intrigue and the trust that he had in his OC. One of the things that he had mentioned was that it felt like they have this huge whiteboard with all these calls on it on game day. But Andy went back to like the fact that, yeah, but despite all of this, we're still trying to keep it as simple as possible. And they're going to rep the hell out of what they run. And one of the things that came up on one of the podcasts I was listening to, he said, the playbook is a living document. It's evolved and it has to. Right? I think his offense speaks to that, right? You see the creativity. Definitely, if you haven't yet, go to Twitter, check out some of the clips that are out there. There are also some wild stats. I know Sports Source Analytics, which Penn State I know used to use. I'm not sure if they still do or not, but James Franklin had referenced them a few times.
I believe it's used by the playoff as well.
Okay, that would make sense because they've got some really interesting numbers there too. When comparing Kansas's offense to what we all just lived through covering Penn State, and it's night and day. And I think, it's a hire that people should be excited about. But I also do understand kind of the pessimism of Penn State fans because you just had on paper so much talent and watched an offense that just completely floundered. So I understand that kind of some of the pessimism that's out there, but I think it's a really good hire. I think it's a smart hire. And quite frankly, John, I'm a little pissed that he was one of the names that was like, somebody had said, we were talking about like names on the list and was like, yeah, definitely put him on the list. And I'm like working through it and I was like, I don't know. Like this kind of seems crazy. Now I'm like, yeah, I'm an idiot. I should have put the name on the list. But as
listen,
James
we
Franklin,
all had the name after the fact, Audrey.
As James Franklin said, oh no, I can show you the Slack messages. As James Franklin said, sometimes when names get floated out there, then you don't get the candidate. So this was really just me doing James a solid by excluding me from his list.
I'm sure he will be eternally grateful for that. Sure. And we'll make sure to thank you for that down the road. But no, I think you nailed it. Apologies to anyone who is playing a drinking game where every time we mention creativity, you take a shot because this is probably
that's why I brought my glass today.
Yeah. But it is the buzzword for a reason. It is what this offense is all about. Just some comparative numbers from a standpoint. Saw a comment that this isn't going to be good for the running backs. Penn State ran for 2,240 yards this year. Kansas ran for 2,536 with one running back over 1,200 yards and one with 599. I think this is going to be great for Singleton and Allen. I think it's going to be better for them than anybody. Now, Drew Aller is the priority, and I think it will also be incredible for him. I will be curious to see, and this is what will be interesting, how he changes the offense, because you're going to see those creative, dynamic things, but you don't want Drew Aller moving as much as you want Jalen Daniels and Jason Beam moving, right? You want to allow him to operate as a passer more than a runner. So I'll be curious to see what he can kind of add, what layers of his offense he can add to make this more of a pass-first offense, which is what I think it should be with Drew Aller as the quarterback, especially next season. Assuming they can get some help at wide receiver, which is a big assumption to make at this point, I know. But I do think like he's going to maximize the quarterbacks and whoever they are at Penn State. More importantly, I think the running backs are going to help maximize the quarterbacks, and everyone is going to help maximize the quarterback. This is not going to be all on Drew Aller's shoulders, but he will end up looking really, really good by the end of it, is my guess. Because Jalen Daniels, who is an excellent quarterback, excellent runner, excellent passer, like I said, someone that probably would have been in the Heisman conversation had he been healthy this year. Frankly, Kansas may have had a chance at 10 wins this year had he been healthy all season. But I think this is you're going to see that kind of guy maximize no matter what. You're going to see him be the focal point. You're going to see him put in a position to succeed. Which, listen, for 12 games this season, or for 10 games this season, excuse me, that wasn't always the case, right? It didn't feel like Drew Aller was always being put in a position to succeed. And if you get that as a starting point, that's a very, very good sign.
Yeah, I think, John, too, the thing that kind of the timing piece to this is nice, in terms of, James Franklin wanted to have this hire in place
Oh,
before the bowl game.
I thought you meant for us.
Oh, well, yeah,
It
it's
is
always
nice
about
for
us.
us.
It's always about us. Yeah, I've got family coming to town this weekend, and I was getting close to being like, I don't know how we're gonna pull this one off.
Yeah.
So I mean, the assumption is that this goes final Friday. We roll through the weekend, bowl selection Sunday, transfer portal opens Monday. But getting your just casual week around here, and
I
people
know.
ask,
Every
what do we
time
do in the off season? Yeah.
I had meetings about the portal and everything today,
Mhm.
and we're talking about it now. And every time I think about what's going to start on Sunday, I just get a shiver down my spine.
It's like I'd said it before, and I stand by it. The month of December is the craziest month to cover college football. But Penn State gets the benefit here of the timing of one. You've got the early signing period coming up too. Like let's
No, why did you have to do that
20
to me?
20 days away at this point.
Yeah, 20 days.
So you've got that. So the timing's good, but also this is going to be important for him to start to understand the talent that's on this roster, understand the personnel, and then get to watch and see these guys as they go through bowl prep. Because that's the other piece here. We won't know, and I'm assuming here that we'll hear from James Franklin on Sunday. Typically, he talks after bowl selection, which now I'm not sure how that happens because I'm sure he'll still talk, but we're gonna have a lot of OC questions
Yeah,
but
the setup is probably not going to be fun.
but the thing here is how they go forward with calling this bowl game. I would assume you stick with Snyder and Howell and what you've been doing. But also, John, it's good because we've seen it with Kirk Shiraka before too, which again, I know now I'm sending people into spiral mode, which is not my intent here. But I just remember sitting there at the Cotton Bowl and watching Shiraka literally with a piece of paper in front of him on the roster with faces and trying to go through and line up names. And then he was FaceTiming with prospects and trying to get to know them. That's everything that has to happen here in the next 2.5, 3 weeks. Because then we're going to start to see roster attrition, right? That's the natural part of every college football team that's going to take place here. What I will say is I think so many times fans, they see a guy go in the portal and they say, oh, that's because they got a new OC and he didn't like the hire. That is not like these decisions James Franklin was having with his players and the assistant coaches were having since the season ended last week. Like those were this week conversations. Yes. So if a guy plans to enter the portal, chances are it will not be a surprise to the coaching staff. Might be a surprise to the fans, might be a bit of a surprise to you and I, but those inside the building kind of know, I think, what's coming. So yeah, I do think the timing piece here, which again, when you fire someone in season, James Franklin said, I'm not sure if you really get a head start because there's only so many realistic candidates, but ultimately they did get a bit of a head start because here you are on November 30th and you effectively know and have your OC in place for 2024.
Yeah, the season ended 6 days ago and they know who it's going to be.
Was it 6 days ago, John? You could have told me it was 3 weeks ago, and I said, sure,
It feels like it's been a month. I will say I have slept in a couple times this week, and it has been very nice. But no, I think you're right on the timing, right? This is important for Kotelnicki to get in there and to evaluate guys in bowl practices. I would be floored if he coaches the bowl game. Like, absolutely I can't see it. Floored. Yeah. There's no way. Now, again, I'm sure this is a jinx, but I think this is a good opportunity for him to get in there, evaluate, kind of, just watch over things without having to be directly involved in all of it. Like you said, let Snyder and Howell handle things as they had the last 2 games, and then go from there, right? I think we won't see what this offense looks like. To answer one of the questions in the chat, we won't see what this offense is going to look like at first glance until the blue-white game. I think that's going to be our first 10 at it, and even then, that's really early in their installs, right? Like they don't have everything totally in that they want to have in yet. That'll be something that I'm sure we'll ask about in the spring ball when we get there, right? Like how far along is this offense? How much the offense is installed at that point?
John, that is my cue. That is my cue. You mentioned the blue-white game, and because we've got everything flying at us at all directions and all angles here in late November, Penn State did announce an hour ago, Thursday night, 2024 blue-white game date is set, April 13th in Beaver Stadium.
I need to write this down.
April 13th, 2024. Right. That is when you all can file into Beaver Stadium and see whatever glimpses of this offense you're going to start to see.
Of course, that's announced right now. Of course it is.
It's also going to be interesting, too, in that, one of the things last year, Penn State had that public practice for like the first time ever. And part of the reasoning was because they said, yeah, nothing that we're going to be doing this year is new because teams have seen Mike Yurcich here a few years. So I think there was always the caveat of, hey, if there's a new OC, I don't know if we're going to be getting that. So that's just, who knows? I hope I'm wrong. But John, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned Snyder and Hal, and I am with you. I think that they will call the bowl game. What do you think this position, this move means for them, right? Because these guys are both the co-interim OCs. They both have play calling aspirations. Snyder obviously is older, wants to be an OC, and it's pretty clear that the timing here, it's not going to happen now. And James Franklin is, I think, said all the right things with those guys and, thank them for basically being good soldiers. They put a really nice game plan together against Michigan State. What do you think this means for them, if anything?
Yeah. I don't know that it'll mean a ton. Before I go too much further, again, I know I mentioned this earlier. Those of you just tuning in, though, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, hit the thumbs up and the subscribe button down below us. We appreciate it. But I don't know that it changes too much. I think there was always a chance that Snyder was going to be a candidate for other jobs, right? I think he is, he's going to be a candidate for head coaching jobs and offensive coordinator jobs, and eventually he's going to get one. Once Charles Huff was, once the world learned that Charles Huff would be back for another year at Marshall, I think that kind of took away one obvious potential destination for Snyder. I still think there might be some out there. What they are, I don't know. I haven't been surveying the landscape, but I'd be surprised if programs weren't interested in J1 Snyder at this point. He's an excellent recruiter. We talked to him. He's got a great personality. Like it is easy to see why, he would interview well. It's easy to see why he would succeed as a head coach or an offensive coordinator. He's a very bright football mind, former quarterback, all that stuff. But I don't know that it changes too much. I think the curious thing for me is Andy Kotelnicki didn't coach quarterbacks at Kansas, right? Like, yeah. I want to know
that was a good point.
That structure changes because he worked with the offensive line, and obviously Phil Troutwine is in place. Does Danny O'Brien?
We've heard Danny O'Brien. They think he's a young rising star. James Franklin said it. We know Drew Aller loves him. That was one of the things. But how? Don't have
right. I think is there going to be a graduate assistant mostly working with the quarterbacks for a year because you can pay him, right? Like you don't have to pay him peanuts like you used to. But is that the solution for a year and you just kind of figure it out when someone leaves? If Snyder does get a job or Hal does, or even Phil Troutwine or one of these guys gets a job, like do they just reshuffle and then hire a quarterbacks coach? Like, I don't know. Like, I think this is the thing that I'm most interested in finding out, like what this is shaped like, what Kotelnicki's role is specifically. We know he's the offensive coordinator. Is he the offensive coordinator and the offensive line coach? Is he the offensive coordinator and the offensive tackles coach and or the you know what I mean? Like, is he the quarterbacks coach? Like, is he going to be working with the quarterbacks? I think it's really fascinating to see. And that is something that I am looking forward to finding out, right? Because until we see the title, until we talk to James, I don't think we're going to know for sure. And then if he is working with the offensive line, what's that mean? Right? Because that shifts a lot of things around at that point. And by the way, we haven't even discussed the fact that Manny Diaz is a candidate for Duke, and then we could be doing this all over again. I casually brought it up.
I eased us into it. I want to say too, because again, my podcast listening this week, which this shouldn't come as a surprise, but at Kansas, he was calling the game from the booth. So I would expect that to continue here. Obviously, we kind of went through this all the last offseason with Mike Yurcich being on the sideline previously, but up in the booth this year. So there is that. But yeah, is it time to talk about Manny Diaz potentially going to Duke? Was that my cue?
Yeah, I think that was the effort there on my part. How did I
do? A for effort, F for execution. To me, It makes sense. Now, as we're recording this, I should probably panic search right now and make sure Duke did not hire someone.
I was gonna say, like with the
Manny Diaz is trending. I see he's trending right now.
He's perpetually trending on my Twitter because of the algorithm, whatever. But I'm just waiting to have that news broken in a tweet that I'm not expecting while we're recording.
Yeah,
I don't see anything.
I think we're in the clear for now. At least I say this. But yeah, I just want to reiterate the point because my preliminary Twitter searches bring up the point that I made earlier that, again, there are only so many head coaching jobs. This is not about money, right? If Manny Diaz wants to be a head coaching job and he gets the opportunity to be a head coaching job and he thinks it's a great fit, he is going to take that job, and no amount of money will change that. Man, that drives me crazy. But that
I can tell.
Yeah, and then I guess,
listen,
John,
to be fair, a lot of Penn State fans are probably also Eagles fans, and Jeffrey Lurie legitimately pays guys head coaches salaries to not take other jobs. Like this was, I don't know if you saw this reporting when Jonathan Gannon took the Cardinals job, the Eagles essentially offered to pay him more to stay. So this is a thing in the NFL. It is not going to be a thing ever at Penn State.
John, I know some of the Penn State fan base is Eagles fans, but some of them probably just tuned out and now despise you for saying that.
Listen, I saw the listenership go up when I mentioned it, so go.
I was going to say, we'll see what the reaction is. I'm just very glad that this specific news is not torpedoing our NFL Sunday. But maybe a defensive coordinator change torpedoes it still. Who knows this time of year? I mean, to me, again, because you start thinking about what jobs are going to come open, and once Duke kind of came along, like to me, that was that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
To me, the other one, Syracuse, I thought made sense. They obviously went with Fran Brown, which I think is a tremendous hire.
Yes.
I've been some people at work joke with me about it, but I've kind of been the Fran Brown, bit of a hype train conductor there. He's somebody who, whenever we do our recruiting confidentials, always comes up. He's somebody that I thought Temple should have made their head coach a few years ago. But all of the madness that's going to unfold with personnel and roster shaping and all this stuff, John, also got bowl selection on tap on Sunday. And you and I haven't talked about this, so are we in alignment with the bowl landing spot?
So I go back and forth.
I'm thinking peach at this point as Thursday at almost 7 p.m. Eastern.
So am I, but I'm not going to pretend I know. I don't think anyone involved knows at this point.
The playoff committee will slot the bowl.
Yeah.
That's why the rankings matter. That's why Penn State being 10th matters a lot, right? It doesn't really matter if the Peach Bowl says, hey, we really want Penn State. We'd love to have them here. They haven't been here. The college football playoff is going to put Penn State where they want to put them. And that to me is the other point to remember in all of this. I think unless something crazy happens this weekend, that's probably what we're looking at. I mean, that's what I'm anticipating, but
I don't know that it has to be that crazy for it to be the Cotton Bowl. Like, I don't,
what
I mean?
No, I'm sorry. In terms of crazy, I meant crazy to fall out of New Year's 6. So, yeah.
Oh, yeah. That would take Oklahoma. Actually, man, I could kind of see Oklahoma State beating Texas, which would doom Penn State, as would Iowa beating Michigan. Those are the only two that I think that would do it. But yeah, my anticipation right now is that they're going to make a New Year's 6 bowl. But to go back to what you were saying about Manny Diaz real quick, the other job, one that I thought, like when Dave Doran was connected to the Mississippi State job, and had he left North Carolina State, like that would have made a lot of sense.
That was a job that Manny was absolutely interested in, and I do believe he interviewed there.
Yeah. The Mississippi State, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I am under that impression as well. But had Doran taken that job, or had he gotten that job that went to Jeff Lebby, it would have also opened up North Carolina State, which I feel confident saying Manny Diaz would have had interest in. I'm unsure of NC State's interest. I would anticipate that they would have had it. I don't say that with a ton of certainty. But he wants to be a head coach. We know this. And if
just pay him more money, John, just pay him more money and keep him here.
Please stop. But
my spiral has started. We're not even.
I know. I'm begging. Yet. Where do I find the end live stream button here? But no, I think Duke would make a lot of sense for Manny Diaz. Then it's a matter of Penn State searching again. I've seen people connect Tom Allen to Penn State. Tom, of course, was the head coach at Indiana, took over after being the defensive coordinator there for a year. I am not certain that he will want to get back into it right away. From a defensive coordinator standpoint, I think he could be a candidate. I think there's some logic there. I of course covered Tom for all of 10 months when I was out in Indiana. But
you're gonna show off your Hoosier pride here, John.
But no, I do think like Tom Allen would be a good hire. But yeah, I would be curious to see what direction James would go in, because we know he wants these guys, as he has said, to be the head coach of their unit. And he's not in these meetings as much as he is the offensive meetings, right? So you really want to get, that's why I'm guessing he would probably rather hire someone with head coaching experience to be a defensive coordinator. Just so they can they know what it's like to run the room, to run a full program. Plus you want this to be a launching point for guys too, to continue to attract good candidates like Andy Kotelnicki, for instance.
I'm glad you said that, because again, this is a guy, OC, who's coming here with head coaching aspirations, right? That was
which by the way, I had heard that might be something that could have kept him from taking this job, right? The one, loyalty to Lance Leipold, and two, he wants to be a head coach. And so I think maybe there was some anticipation that could have been the next step rather than taking another OC job.
Well, I mentioned that as the fact that at some point Penn State needs to get back to this being that bit of a launching pad for an OC into a head coaching job, right? Like we saw it when Joe Moorhead left for Mississippi State. We saw it with Ricky Ronnie, obviously going to Old Dominion, different scale there for sure. But like this can be a launching pad job with this roster. I think it certainly could be, and probably should be for the next hire. But I think, did we have this conversation? In this format, I'm sure we talked about it in the car, but if we talked about
I have no idea.
The Anthony Poindexter, like what do we
genuinely?
I don't remember.
I have no clue.
I feel like we might.
The last podcast was a complete blur.
That was our sleep deprived one. Yeah.
Yes, as anyone who's watching or listening could tell or see. But no, I think, Dex would make a lot of sense. If you're talking internal, I think Dex as an internal promotion would make more sense than Snyder or Howell would have, given the timing. Honestly, again, with Anthony Poindexter, I think he's going to be a very successful defensive coordinator. I think he's going to be a very successful head coach. He is like an all-time great of college football, as everybody knows. He's very, very smart, helps run the defense. You know what I mean? He's already co-defensive coordinator. I think he would make sense. I would be curious to see if James would want to do it just because of the timing of it. And again, if we did have this conversation already, then I definitely said this already, that I would think the timing of it could get in the way of it, just because this is a team that's going to make the playoff next year. Spoiler alert again, for anyone who hasn't heard that before. But they're going to make the playoff next year, and you know what I mean? You want to give yourself an opportunity to compete at that point. And is it the time to have a first-year defensive coordinator? If you think they're the right person for the job, then the answer is yes, right? Like it doesn't matter at that point. I just wonder if that's going to be the case. I do think
if we get to that point,
role.
Manny Diaz
feels like, by the way, just of note, someone mentioned in the chat, which this is an excellent point. Duke is also looking at Jim Knowles from Ohio State. So Penn State fans are really, I'm sure, really pulling for Jim Knowles to get that head coaching job down at Duke.
Here's where it all comes full circle, John. You and I pregame Ohio State were down on the field, and we saw Jim Knowles give Mike Yurcich a hug. Who would have thought potentially both of these guys not with their respective teams next year?
I thought you were going to pull, is Mike Yurcich going to get hired by Jim Knowles as the offensive coordinator at Duke if he gets it?
That was not my guess. But Manny Diaz was not among the Broyles Award semifinalists that were announced this week. I know there was a lot of bemoaning. Is that the right word? Complaining. Yeah. A lot of anger.
I didn't get into this on Twitter, but it is just incorrect to not have him on there. He's undoubtedly.
Who would you take off the list?
Mike Denbrock, I would take off the list. Mike Bobo, I would take off the list.
I'm calling LSU right now.
Yeah.
Calling Georgia.
Mike Bobo, I would absolutely take off the list too. I'm trying to think who else. Phil Parker was on there.
Iowa. Yeah, and I think the Iowa argument is a bit of, well, if you didn't have him, how many games would they have won with that offense, right?
I would leave left Brian Ferentz on the list.
Of course you would have. Of course you would have.
Brian Ferentz.
No, I mean, I
clearly
think
not on that list.
Obviously Manny Diaz had a hell of a year. The Penn State defense had a hell of a year. Postseason awards, I think, kind of they are what they are. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. I mean, you could tell obviously by James Franklin was retweeting some things about Manny Diaz pretty quickly, smashing that repost button when the Big Ten awards came out. But
I will continue to call it the retweet button for what it's worth.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is it a repost or retweet? I don't know. But Olu Fashanu, I did want to mention this, Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year. That was the other thing this week.
Deservedly so.
Yeah, deservedly so. Significant for Penn State. I think you look at Olu got everything out of coming back that he wanted to, and I think Penn State got everything out of him that they possibly could have. And to me, you're at this great spot right now where you can sell this to prospective players and say, hey, look at Big Ten Offensive Lineman of the Year. Look what we just did. Probably a top 10 player in the NFL draft. But then I think there's also the point, which is important, is Olu is healthy. And he got to this point. They were able to, we heard so much early in the year about load management. Now we'll see, because again, something else coming in December, who opts out of the bowl game, who plays. We've seen it before where players do participate, but it's a modified snap count. I remember that was Barkley in the Fiesta Bowl. So that's kind of the next wave of things to come here too.
And I did want
to mention that.
Some fans think like Penn State is immune to those opt-outs, and they've generally done a good job of getting guys to play.
Unless it's been the Outback Bowl, yeah.
Well, I mean,
if it's a New Year's 6, I think they're probably in as good of a spot as possible with guys. But
I would be surprised if there isn't opt-outs. Like, really surprised at this point if there are not opt-outs, or at least one opt-out. But yeah, I think it just makes sense, right? Like there are guys. Even we saw with Joey Porter Jr. last year, right?
He was the only one to like technically opt out. Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah, but he was.
He was still at the game though.
He was a projected first-round pick. Made all the sense in the world, right? Like that, when that stuff kind of lines up, that's kind of what my expectation would be. But yeah, no, I think this is going to be chaotic over the next, I was going to say like 3 weeks, but it's like 6 weeks because December never ends. It is just what feels like a 1 year long month. We will have
happy holidays, folks.
Yes. And we will be around whenever stuff like this happens. Presumably if Manny Diaz departs, we will be right back at it. If Manny Diaz needs replaced, we will be back at it. When
if Manny Diaz stays, we will be back at it.
Yeah, we will be here. We will have you the rest of the way. I don't even want to call it the off season, because like they saw another game. That's the crazy thing. College football jam packs the off season into a month where there's still football actively going on. It's crazy.
You have that, and then the early signing period, right? That's the other thing, which is significant, which is quickly approaching. I'm trying to like get stuff done like in these periods where it's like, okay, like nothing's happened yet. Like I was ahead of the game today, and then was like, oh, around like 3-4 o'clock, it's like, well, there goes my night.
Yep.
So hopefully, I hope to have some content up on The Athletic in addition to what's already up there, what we already have on the OC hire. I've got some interviews lined up with some interesting folks who I think are going to give us some good perspective into this offense that I'll be writing about. And then we will see what else the weekend brings. Hopefully we hear from James Franklin Sunday at some point after bowl selection, preferably after bowl selection and before the Packers play.
I assume we will find out later than we want to when that will be happening. But I'm right there with you. It's going to be chaotic. But we appreciate all of you that have tuned in to watch this live with us. We are very grateful for that. Like I said, hit that thumbs up button down below. It is going to be a long few weeks. Like I said, we are here for it, and we are very excited to be here with you guys for it. So I think that's a good place to leave it. As I mentioned before, you can read Audrey at The Athletic. You can read me at Center Daily Times at centerdaily.com. Find Audrey on Twitter at OddSnyder4, me at John Sauber. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day.